Hey, this is Pastor Ryan. Thanks for joining us for this week's Sunday Preview. This week's passage is 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 12 through 19. First, we want to put the passage in its larger context. We have three sections in 1 Peter: the salvation of the believer, the submission of the believer, and the suffering of the believer. This covers how we gain our holiness, how we live in harmony with the world around us, and how we need to live in humility with each other. So let's go ahead and get into the text. In verse 12, Peter stops and refers to his audience as beloved, telling them not to be surprised at the fiery trial when, and not if, it comes upon you. The purpose of these trials are to test you. Instead, we're called to rejoice insofar as you share Christ's sufferings. Peter gives two possible outcomes: that you may also rejoice and be glad when, a time marker, his glory is revealed. Peter has just been talking about God's glory in the prior context. It's certain his glory will be revealed. But Peter brings up a hypothetical. If you are insulted for the name of Christ, you are then blessed. If this has happened, or is happening to you, you are blessed because the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you. It's uncertain what these two things exactly are. Peter also eliminates a number of possible scenarios, as he says that believers aren't to suffer as a murderer, thief, evildoer, or meddler. But it's possible for us to suffer as a Christian simply for claiming the name of Christ. If that's truly the scenario, we're called not to be ashamed, but instead glorify God in that name. It looks like he gives a reason why this suffering might be happening. It is time, right now, for judgment to begin at the household of God. But he contrasts that with the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel of God, who look to be in a worse situation. An implication is the household of God is comprised of those who obey the gospel of God. Then Peter quotes the Old Testament, showing where this idea is grounded. The life of the righteous has always been difficult, and there have always been the ungodly and sinner who deserve judgment. We see the correlations between Peter's ideas and concepts and those found in the Old Testament. Then Peter draws a conclusion. He says to let those who suffer, a concept this passage seems to be centered around, according to God's will, respond by entrusting their souls to a faithful Creator while doing good. Before we go, we want to take a look at the broader themes and questions of the passage. First, the passage is clearly about suffering. What should cause suffering, how we should respond to suffering, and a list of things we shouldn't suffer for. Second, it looks like Peter is giving us a couple of options. It looks like we can suffer for Christ, and we can suffer for evil doing. But what if we don't want to suffer at all? Why doesn't Peter address the possibility of hiding our faith in order to avoid suffering? Is being silent about our faith an option? And a question I have is about the fiery trial Peter speaks about. Is the fiery trial literal, as many early church believers were burned at the stake for their faith? Or does Peter intend for this to be taken metaphorically, meaning a really tough circumstance? And if it's meant to be taken literally, is that why Peter says we must entrust our souls to a faithful Creator, knowing our bodies would ultimately perish here on earth? Thanks for joining us for the Sunday Preview. We hope this spurs on your thinking and prepares you for our time together on Sunday morning. God's blessings on your week.